Hi, my name is Lorraine Watry and welcome to my studio. I am a watercolor artist and I've worked with watercolor for 26 years now, and I thought I would start a new series of videos where I go over different tips, tricks, and techniques for working with watercolor. And hopefully these short videos will help you in your journey, and if you have a question or a technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will try to accommodate that in a future video.
Hello, today's video is going to start a little different than I have with some of my other videos, and thanks to all those who have stuck with me this summer. It's been a busy time of the year and I didn't get a whole lot of videos out, but I wanted to try to get back into the routine. I don't know that I will be able to do one every week, but I will continue to try to get some videos done for everyone. So for this video, I had someone ask about doing pattern on fabric, and I have another video that I've already done on painting fabric, and I will try to link that one below this video so that you can go watch that. And the question was, do you put the shadows on over the top of the pattern if it's got a pattern on the cloth, or do you put the pattern down and the shadow down and then do the pattern on top of that? And the answer is it can depend on what you are trying to do. So if your cloth can have slightly blurred edges, the pattern on it, maybe it's not your center of attention, it could be something that's in the background, it's not maybe that important, then the shadows could go over the top of the pattern. And if the pattern blurs slightly, then that would be fine. Then the other instance would be maybe it's your center of attention, or it's got a particular color in the pattern, or a pattern that you don't want to blur. Then you would probably want to put your shadows down first and then paint the pattern on top of it. There also is a possibility of painting the pattern, putting some shadow over it. If some of that pattern blurs a little bit, or it maybe isn't as dark as you want, then you might come back over your pattern once the shadow has dried. So there's a variety of ways that you can paint cloth with a pattern. So this is one of my paintings, and in this image you can see that the pattern is pretty simple, but I believe I did the shadows over the top of the pattern. I don't know that I went back and adjusted any of those lines. The next image is a pattern where I believe I masked all of those little shapes that are on the cloth, and then later removed that mask. So I painted the fabric color of green, I put the shadows on top of the green, and then, actually I may have waited to put the shadows in because some of the shadow goes over the colored pattern. So then once I had removed the mask, I painted the color on those little dots and pattern that are on the cloth, and then put the shadow in there. And for the most part, my little dots of color didn't really change when I put the shadow over it. So it didn't really affect the look of that one. For this one, this is not actually cloth, but it's supposed to represent a crumpled paper behind the brush and the paint. And for that one, I wanted the lines on there to remain kind of hard-edged. So I believe I put the shadow down first, let it dry completely, and then went back over those shadow areas with my lines to make it kind of, I think I was trying to make it look like pencil or a pale marker. And then the last one right quick is this Monopoly board, and you can see in the back where it says Monopoly, and has the face of the Monopoly character back there, I did this darker shadow on top of the words that were back there, and some of that darker value, it was probably phthalo blue and alizarin crimson for a mix that gave me a black, and some of that kind of blurred and fuzzed a little bit. And that didn't really bother me because of the fact that it was in the background, and if some of that lettering was a little softer, I was okay with that. And it just makes it look like a painting rather than a photograph, because your photograph might have blurry edges, but it wouldn't sort of have bled and look like it was kind of running in the darker shadow area. And then the text that was up at the front, I believe I put the shadow down first and then painted the text on top, the dark lines on top of that shadow. So while it's not cloth, it's the same technique basically. You're creating something that you may not want to blur, or that has some pattern to it. And so the shadows, again, can be sometimes done before, sometimes after, and sometimes you go back and adjust your pattern, whether it's on a cloth or something else, to maybe make it a little, give it more presence, or clean up the edges a little bit if they did blur, if you put the shadow on second. All right, so I am going to switch to my palette and my board here with a drawing on it. And I did do the drawing kind of quickly. This was just a very quick photograph that I took. This was a towel I had sitting around with some hummingbirds on it, and they're very stylized hummingbirds, so it kind of looks like a pen and ink that someone did with a little bit of color on them. So this is maybe a different kind of pattern than you might get, say, on a quilt block or on a towel that has a consistent pattern throughout, but it's the same idea. This being a white towel is going to not have an overall color. I'm not necessarily going to try to complete this painting, but I wanted to give you a quick idea. And for this, I think my best option is to do the shadows first, because of the fact that there are black lines in here. And I could use an ink pen to do those black lines, or I can just do some black paint, and I'll make a mix to do that. And for black, generally, the darker your value is, the darker the color is on the pattern. If you paint across it with something, it's more likely that it's going to blur and move. So that is why I'm looking at painting the shadows first. And because this is, as I said, a white cloth, I'm going to, and I have a blue bottle sitting here just to give some shadow over it. I'm not going to worry about painting the bottle. I'm going to use kind of a slightly muted purple mix. So this is cobalt. And then I'm going to get out my warm red, which is pearl scarlet. I have not masked anything on here. And get some of the pearl scarlet out. Okay, and then I am going to bring a little bit of that, a lot of that over. I didn't mean to pull that much over. Clean my brush a little bit. Okay. So this will be a muted purple because the orange red that I am mixing with it is going to create a muted purple. If I had pulled over Quin Rose or something like that, then it would be a more vibrant purple. And for this, I'm trying to see, it's got soft edges on some of it, even though this is a cast shadow from the bottle, which I think I'm going to just go ahead and put it in as a hard edge. I did go get a little water because the initial color I had there was too dark. And the shadow comes... So right now I'm just looking at the shadows. I'm not looking at the other colors at all, and kind of comes up over this way. It does start to fade out as it goes away from the bottle. So I'm going to go get some clear water, and as I bring it up over this direction, there's a fold right here. So I'm looking for anything where there are changes in the value, or possibly the fabric itself is bending and causing a maybe a harder edge. Like there's definitely a hard edge right here, and it is darker down in here. So I'll go back and get the darker value. Now there is just a little bit, I'm going to leave, so I don't have to dry this with my dryer, I'm going to leave a little bit of a line right there that's light, and then I can come, trying to figure out where I'm at. Okay, so then I can come and bring that shadow up in through here. The color changed just a little bit. It's a little bluer up in here and probably a little too dark. So I'm just going back. I dried my brush just a little, and then I could go back while it was still damp and lift a touch of that color out. Now down in this area, this is one of the darkest parts of the shadow. There's a little curl right there. And I need a touch more of the red. It's looking a little blue. So right down in here, and the fabric curls up. So when I drew this fabric, I was looking for where the shadows are, where the fabric turns and curls, and I put in all of those lines. And then there's a dark shadow right in here. I probably need to get out some more of the cobalt. So I am not necessarily doing every shadow right this second, because there are some areas that need to dry, and then I could come back to areas that those wet areas right now are touching. So it may not make a whole lot of sense at this moment. Okay, right there, and then there's a shadow. I'm watching this edge up here. I need to get back up there real quick. But there's a shadow that comes down right here, and then that has a soft edge at the bottom. So right here, this part actually just kind of fades as it goes to the right just a little bit. It's not as dark. There is a little piece right under here, and then actually I think that's slightly in shadow. Yeah, it is right here. There is a shadow on the table, and shadows are going to be the darkest right at the edge of the object where it touches the surface. So I will have to come back. I mean, I could put some of that in right now, but right now I'm focusing on the towel. And this shadow right here does get softer edged as it comes down right in here. So if you have not watched my other video, I believe I talk about cast shadows and form shadows. So some of these shadows are form shadows. So this one that I'm going to paint right now is a form shadow, and that is because the cloth is kind of bunched up, and right in this area it created a shadow that sort of tells you that the fabric is sort of pushed up in there and the light is not hitting this side as much as it is over here. And so that form shadow is going to have generally softer edges, and it will help tell the viewer something about the object. It might tell you that it's a cone, a cylinder, or it might tell you that it's a block, or something like this, a piece of fabric that has some variety to the shapes because of the fact that it can be all bunched up and can have some variety that way. And then a cast shadow is one that happens where, like, this shadow right here is caused because the fabric above it, that lighter piece right here, is causing this area down here to get a shadow because this is hanging over the lower section. So this shadow right here is considered a cast shadow, or it is a cast shadow. And so you will often see both or have both kinds of shadow in an object. I think I want to start with a little bit of water. So I'm going to go over here and just apply some water. And then when I bring my color next to it on the lower edge, it will be soft edged right down in here. And then up here, it'll have a harder edge feel to it. And then as I come down here in this corner, there's a couple folds and bunched areas. This is definitely a darker shadow right here. And a little more right here. Whoops, too much red. I may have to pull some of that back off, but we'll see. And I'm okay if the shadow has a little variety of color in it. Okay, so then as that shadow hits the end over here, I'm going to use just a touch of water to blur that edge. So even if it's a cast shadow, sometimes because of how the fabric is softer edged, doesn't have hard edges necessarily, then sometimes you'll get those softer forms happening. Let's see. So I think what I will do is continue adding some of the shadows. I must have flicked some water up there. I'll continue adding some shadows to this other section. There's not a whole lot more up in here. And then I'll speed this section up right quick and come back and show you some of the painting on top of that. All right, so I have kind of put in shadows pretty much everywhere. There was one section right in here and right in here that I need to add a little bit, but I wanted to do that talking about it as I go. So right here, there is a section that's right here on the image that is not as dark as the shadows on either side, but it is in shadow. So I have these guys decently dark, and so I'm going to come in with some color right next to that and darken that area. And there are some subtle things going on in other parts as well, but for the sake of not taking forever doing this, I just am going to do little pieces here and there. Okay, so then the area by the head of this hummingbird is in shadow right here because the fabric is dipping right in around the neck area. And it can be a little hard to tell sometimes if you're working on a piece of cloth that is curving and you're trying to figure out where the shadow is or isn't. And in general, if overall it works, it's not one little section maybe not exactly right, or maybe you leave some part of some shadow out, it won't matter in the grand scheme of it. It will still probably read as fabric. So right now, this probably looks like a hot mess. It probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and that's partly because I need to get in some of those patterns and things that are on top of it. Now, my intent was to put the shadows in and to not necessarily have to come back and mess with them or add more shadows. But once you start getting the pattern in and you start seeing some of the things maybe you missed or you didn't see originally, then you might have to come back and make some adjustments. One of the things that I know I will have to make is that I actually missed drawing this. I drew it, I just didn't draw it correctly. So here's the bird's head right here. And if you look over here, there's a big distance between the head and the edge of the fabric. So this line right here is wrong. And I did not pre-stretch my paper, so it will erase easily. And I just need to, if I'm trying to draw what I'm seeing there, I just need to bring that up a little better. And it comes in right about here-ish. Okay. So that piece of cloth there, because I've got it on a white table, the cloth itself is actually a little darker than the table. So in order to, because it's curled over and because I want the cloth to separate from the table, I'm going to use some of that shadow color along the edge to darken, and I put some water down first, and this is too dark. I'm going to go get a little water, and that color was still wet enough that I could just come in there and lighten it just a little bit. So now that will separate from the table that's behind it, that white table. So I could do that same thing over here. In fact, I think I will for this edge. Just kind of continue that color down here. And then on the outside of this side, there is a dark shadow. So I can leave that for now. I need to let that other piece dry. And as I said, anything that is touching a surface, generally that's going to be your darkest area of the shadow. So I'm going to make a darker purple value, and I could change this color. So if it was sitting on a wood table or something with some color, this shadow color here may not be the same as what I'm using for the cloth. And I also am looking at finding thicker and thinner lines for that shadow, because I can, one, see it in the image, but also because it makes it more interesting. I think I'm going to go get my ultramarine blue instead of the cobalt for this, because the cobalt won't go as dark as the ultramarine, and I don't feel like that's quite dark enough. Now this might also be something that you wait and just do toward the end, but I figure since I have those colors out, I might as well go ahead and do it now. Okay, so that shadow's in, and now that dramatically makes it feel darker than some of the other shadows that I had there. And then this section right here is dark under, right under there, and then it gets a little, just a touch lighter as it comes toward the front. It's not quite catching as much of the shadow. There's a darker value here, and again I'm trying to kind of mimic the image and looking for thicker and thinner lines. And even though that is sort of it is outlining part of the fabric, in this case, because it is a shadow value and it just needs to be there, it works. Sometimes I will tell students, be careful you don't outline things, but in this situation, you kind of have to. All right. And then I'm hoping this corner is dry, and it is good enough. Make this a little darker. Okay. And then I'm basically drying my brush on my towel, so keeping the color on the brush, but because I wiped it on the towel, it took a lot of that darker value off. Now, one of the things I do not want to do is this lower edge is facing the viewer, and so we see the shadow. This upper edge, we don't see a shadow at, where it might be touching the table. So I don't want to outline the whole thing. I just want to put the shadow where I'm seeing it. And this shadow on this side is lighter because of the fact that it's closer to the light source. And so it's not as dark a shadow. Okay, so I now have a little more form going on. And the one, maybe couple places that I want to increase the shadow before I go paint some of the pattern on there is right under here. I need to darken right in there, and as I come down just a little bit, and then right here, and I actually think I'm going to bring this over just a little. I see a little bit of a darker value right there. And then I'm going to come back with my brush just barely damp and let the moisture on there pull some of that color out, because I want to soften that edge so that it looks like it's kind of fading into the area around it. And actually, I don't know that I got this dark enough. I come back in. Right in here, just faded a little bit, or dried a little lighter, I should say. Okay, that's better. So now that section starts to have a little more form. This section is maybe not quite dark enough down at the bottom and on the right side. And so I'm going to use some water, and I will need to get a little more color out, so I think I'll do that first. So when you're doing a wet on wet thing or something with water where you're placing water on the paper first, then it's important to have your color out and ready, because when you put the water down, it already will start to dry before you might come back with your color. And then I'm going to get some water on my brush and place it up here. And then I will come paint right up next to that area. Bring some of it down. I did dry my brush just a touch. And right here, looks like it goes up and over. And then it kind of fades again as it goes up into this area. Okay, so now I'm starting to get more form in there. I've got darker values where it is the darkest on the cloth. And I actually need to darken some of these other places as well. So I'll do that right quick. And then I'll be right back and we will start working on the pattern. So the cloth is got quite a bit of form now, and the one last thing I want to do is make sure that most of this color is not going to move very much, and so I need to dry it. If I start painting on it while it's just even semi damp, most of it is dry, but anything I just painted could be just a little damp. So it is best to take a few seconds, dry it completely, and then paint on top of it. Because when you dry it, whether you let it just sit until it's completely dry or you dry it with a dryer, that sets the paint just a little bit, and that will help keep it from lifting as easily if you were painting some color on top of it. So I'll be right back. So I have not figured out in advance what colors I might use for this. I'm just going to be kind of basic with this and not get too hung up over it being the exact color of what I'm seeing there. And so I've pulled out some sap green. I'll probably mix it with a little bit of my cobalt, just so it mutes parts of it, especially over in the area over in here. It's not quite as vibrant as on the birds themselves. And they have kind of some rough edges, sort of soft edged in a few places. A little bit of a washy effect looking like it's on this. So I placed just kind of some water randomly, and I'm going to, as I'm painting this on, paint it with some little openings here and there. Whoops, more blue than green. All right, and that comes right up about in there. So you can see where the shadow is. It's going to be, my mix will be a little more muted than where it is just plain paper. And so I'm not trying to avoid the shadows. I am just painting right over them and hoping they don't move very much. Depending on your pigments, your brand of paint, sometimes your what am I trying to say? Sometimes the color, the specific color, sometimes they will move a little more than another color might. Most pigments, if you're not scrubbing over it, will maybe only move a little bit. Okay, and down in here it's greener. Now this is pretty, oops, yeah, I'll leave it. Actually, there is just a touch of green. I meant to do that. Okay. And maybe a touch of that is right in here. The tail of that bird. And then I do see a little bit of very pale blue that's probably maybe my phthalo turquoise. And it is a dry brush look to it. It's kind of skipping over the surface of the paper. So I'm going to dry the back of my brush just a little bit. Hopefully that will dry it enough. And then just up in, oh, that is really dark. I don't want it that dark. That's better. It's going to be bluer than what's on the image, but that's okay. And then there's some of that. It is working to leave little openings. When you want to try to do some dry brush with little textural things, one, it helps to have paper that is textured like the cold press or hot press. And then by putting your brush on the side and not having very much moisture in it. So the paint I got out, I didn't use a lot of water in it, and a little gnat in here. I am putting it on its side because that pulls at the bristles, and it can help create that dry brush look. There's a little bit of that blue right up in here as well. Okay. So it's starting to have a little more of the pattern on it, and right now, again, it's not going to maybe look exactly correct because don't have those black lines on there yet. And I am going to paint flower. This is maybe darker. It's hard for me to paint pale because I like color. And this does curve around just a little bit right there. One of the pink flowers. And then this flower is in the shadow, and so it may not stand out very much. Actually, I think I'm going to use, I have Quinn Burnt Sienna on my palette, and it's a little orangier sienna, and so I'm going to use that. I know I've been putting color on a little vibrant, so try to make it a little less vibrant. I brought in plants from the garden to overwinter them inside, and now I'm dealing with some fruit flies until they go away. Can be annoying. All right. Right here on the head, under the eye, so I can just put it right under there because the eye is going to be darker. And I think that's it on that one. So this one would be a rufous. There's, on this towel, there's, oh, I think maybe 8 or 10 different hummingbirds that someone designed on there. So I'm going to use that in here instead of the red. This one is down here. This is the probably the ruby-throated, and I'm definitely making it more vibrant than what's there. This is Quinn Rose, some Parole Scarlet, and a little bit of the ultramarine to mute it just a touch, because it is a little in shadow over here. And I want to kind of give it a little bit of a rough edge so that it looks sort of like the towel image. And I think for the pink that's down here, I'm going to come back in. This is my coral, Quinn Coral, and add just a little more color to that. Take out just a touch here so that it stands out maybe a little bit more in the shadow. I think this one's okay. And then I need the greens, so I'll use my sap green. I'll just use it just as is. Right here. It's hard to be loose, which this style definitely is. Okay, and then the sky. Actually, that probably has a little more blue in it. The green does than what I'm using. I've been painting lots of hummingbirds after I took pictures this summer. Been doing lots of hummingbirds. Okay, and then over on this one, so this section right here, the bird is definitely warped because you see the beak above it, and then you just see part of the possibly the wing, or maybe the back of the bird, or maybe both, and we're not seeing a lot of the bird, so it's just a little section. I keep going over the edge there. And it's got a lot of the black marks around it, and you do have to remember when you're painting something that you can't see like this where it's curved under, you have to remember to go into the shadow with your shape. So I know even if it just looks like a dark shadow there, you have to really pay attention and put the color in where it needs to be. Okay, so I think that's it on the color. So now actually I need to go in with a little bit of gray on the beaks. So I'll just use some burnt sienna and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. Make a blue-gray. I think I've got some burnt sienna on my brush still. And it's kind of rough. They left like it's on dry paper there. Same thing here. I haven't looked up recently to see if this is working. Yeah, it's all right. And then on the beak of this one and on the wing area, there's I probably need this to be a little blacker, but that's okay. It will work. Oh, and I see just maybe a touch of that right here. All right, so I'm going to dry this right quick, and then I will be back and finish up with the lines, and hopefully it will all make sense once the lines are in. And that would be the stage at which, if it's not quite making sense, that you could maybe then make some adjustments. So we'll see how it looks when I get back. I'll dry it and I'll be right back. I have finished drying it, and I am going to get out phthalo blue and alizarin crimson and find a semi-clean spot on my palette. And I'm using a small brush. I have my number 6. And I have enough water on there that I can pull the pigment out, but I don't want to get it really wet because the permanent alizarin crimson and phthalo blue can make a nice, it's really a deep purple, but it looks like black if you get it right. So I don't know if you can see my palette real well, but it's kind of, it doesn't have a lot of water in it. It's pretty thick. It moves on my palette, but it's not really wet. And then I'm just going to start mixing a little bit of each of those together until I can get a decent black. And then I'm rolling my brush around in it to get some of that color on there. And there's part of some wording. So on this towel, they actually write the names of the birds, and I'm just going to use this like I would an ink pen, and just start following the lines that this artist created. Maybe one there. Now, depending on how much your brush holds, how much you picked up. You may have to go back. So, and this is pretty dry too. So when it's dry like this, it can need to be replenished kind of soon. Go ahead and fill in the eye. There's a few marks in here. I probably got that a little orange, but that's okay. Okay. So I feel like this area up here is probably needs to go a touch darker, and that would be something that I could possibly do, but it might be an issue and move some of those dark lines that I've just put on. And I did go get just a touch more water in my mix. Now, when it comes over a curve, you need to make sure that you follow the curve. So like for instance, this one, there is a curve, there is a fold in the fabric right there. So I needed to make sure that I curved my line just a little bit, and then it curves the opposite direction, possibly when it comes out, or it might not even connect. So right here, this line doesn't connect with the line that's above it. It is offset because of how the fabric is curled. And that comes up over there. There's a little tiny leaf. You can't quite tell what some of these shapes are, so you just kind of go with the marks that you're seeing. Actually, there's some green right in there, but I'll just go ahead and put the black in for now. And about here. That actually may be a fold right there. It's kind of on the line. So these calligraphy type brush marks are something that if you do them a lot, you get used to making lines that have some variety to them and gives it more interest. Let's see, let's go to the beak. And the beak is kind of funky shaped at the front because the way it curves around the towel. Plus, I think their beaks are a little wide. Maybe a lot wide. Hummingbirds have, most of them, not all of them, but most of them have little thin beaks. There is one or two with bigger beaks, though. Maybe just a mark there. Oh, and I missed the yellow right there, so I'll have to get some yellow out. Felt like something was missing. You guys are probably all yelling at the camera or the screen. Put the yellow in. Okay. And so I'll come back with that, and I need to go over here. Whoops. Okay, that one didn't work so well. And I should have curved it just a little bit at the end since it was going around that shape. Same thing with these. As I come to the right, I need to curve them down just a little. And that helps with the illusion that there's a curl or curve to the fabric. And this area is just darker. And actually I put green where it's black right in here. So I'll go ahead and adjust that. Okay. Maybe a touch of black right in there. And I think because my gray was a little pale, I'm going to use a little bit of the black in there. Oh, and I need to put the lettering down here. So overall, I think the towel is working, or the colors on it are working, and the form of it is working. Let me put this in right quick. There may be just a couple places. This is not wet enough, so I need to go back and get a little more water, because when you want the brush to kind of skim over the paper, if your brush is too dry, it will kind of get caught on the surface of the paper, which I think I'm still could use a little more water in the mix. But I also want it to remain black, so I'm trying not to add too much water. Not getting it. Okay. Close enough. All right, so as I was saying, in general, it's working pretty good. There's an area up here where I think it needs to go a little darker for that one bird, and then I think we will be done. I think hopefully you get the idea of how you can work with it, and this will basically show you that you can come back over an area as long as you're careful with your pressure on your brush. The one area or the one color in here that might blur a little bit. Oh, I need to put some yellow on there right quick. You guys are probably still yelling at me. Put the yellow on. All right. There's the yellow. Okay. The one thing that might move is my black. So if it does, I'm not going to worry about it, but it's a possibility. Okay. Oops, I'm trying to get the cobalt and a little bit of my warm red again. I've got a mess on my palette now. And I want to use the water because it's a soft edged shadow. So I'm using clear water, and I think you can see maybe that some of that black line is moving a little bit. Okay, and then I can come over this part of the bird, that part of the towel, and basically darken that shadow. So if I did that and I really didn't want my black line to be sort of fuzzy edged, or if I felt like I needed to adjust it, that would be where I would let this dry completely, and then I could come back over my black line or any of the colors that I feel like I needed to either clean up a little bit or increase their value. So it can be a back and forth between putting the shadow on and then putting your texture on or your pattern, and then maybe if you need to adjust some area, then you may have to come back over that area. And I think the best thing to do is to try a little sample of your towel or your fabric or whatever you're doing, and just test it on the side. So test it by putting the colors down, your pattern down, and then putting your shadow on top of it, and then do the opposite. Put the shadow down and then put your colors over that, and decide if there's one way or the other that will work better for what you're working on at the moment. So I hope that was helpful to kind of see the process and some of the thoughts that kind of go into creating cloth with pattern. And if you have a tip, trick, or technique that you might like to see in watercolor, please leave a comment below and I will add it to my list, and we'll see if I am able to get one out next week. And I hope you have a good week. See you soon. Bye.